For the first time in 5 years, I found myself leaving a business show ahead of schedule. I work for a telecommunications company, and each year we participate in 3 major business expos hosted in various cities across the country. These events span 5 days, during which we set up our booth on Sunday and Monday, kick off the show Tuesday morning, and wrap up at noon on Thursday. Over the past 5 years, I've faithfully attended every one, staying until the final box was packed and loaded onto the truck Thursday afternoon. But during the most recent show in May at the San Diego Convention Center, an unexpected incident changed everything. On Tuesday night, I twisted my ankle badly, leaving me unable to work at the booth the next day. By lunchtime on Wednesday, my boss pulled me aside and, in no uncertain terms, suggested there was no reason for me to stick around if I couldn't perform my duties. He advised me to find an earlier flight home. I didn't need any convincing. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was on a plane bound for St. Louis. Before boarding, I left a voicemail for my wife, Nina, letting her know I'd be home by 8 o'clock that evening. Nina and I had been married for 9 years, but things weren't smooth before I left for this trip. She'd been upset about something, though she wasn't ready to discuss it at the time. Instead, she said we'd talk when I got back. Despite the discomfort of my injury and the sting of being sent home early, I found a silver lining. I'd finally get to address whatever had been bothering her. When the taxi pulled up in front of our house, I noticed a sleek black Cadillac parked in the driveway. It struck me as odd since I didn't know anyone who drove one. The fact that Nina had company, knowing I was coming home, unsettled me. I had assumed she'd be eager to sort out our issues without distractions. Stepping inside, I immediately heard voices coming from the family room. Curious and slightly anxious, I moved through the kitchen to peek in, and froze at what I saw. Nina was seated on the sofa with my best friend, Ryan Adams. While their presence together wasn't inherently shocking, the fact that her blouse was undone hit me like a punch to the gut. Neither of them noticed me at first. I stepped into view, standing at the edge of the family room, and called out, demanding an explanation. Nina looked startled by my sudden appearance and, to my disbelief, made no effort to adjust her blouse. Her expression carried an air of expectation, almost as if she had been waiting for this confrontation. I pressed for answers, my voice shaking as much from pain as from anger. Nina, wearing an unsettling smile, told me calmly that things weren't as they seemed. Meanwhile, the throbbing in my ankle served as a cruel reminder that this was no nightmare. I was fully awake. Ryan, for his part, remained seated and silent, a smirk playing on his lips as if he were enjoying the spectacle. I had seen enough. Pain or not, I decided Ryan had to leave my house. As I moved toward him, I felt a sudden vice-like grip on my right arm. Before I could react, another man had me in a chokehold, his left arm cutting across my neck while his right twisted my arm painfully behind my back. I could still breathe, but the pressure was enough to send a clear message. I was powerless. Nina's voice rang out with chilling composure. She declared that this was the moment she'd been waiting for. Ryan had apparently spilled details about my behavior at business shows, and Nina wasted no time accusing me of betrayal. She said she'd been hurt deeply, questioning whether I thought she'd never find out or simply wouldn't care. Now, she was determined to get revenge, her way. She explained that she and Ryan, along with the man now restraining me, had planned this confrontation. Her intent? To indulge herself with Ryan and Marcus, the man holding me, while I was forced to watch. I tried to protest, but Marcus quickly silenced me, covering my mouth and nose with his hand. A sharp, chemical scent overwhelmed me, and darkness crept in as I lost consciousness. When I came to, I found myself tied spread-eagle to the bed in the guest room. My injured ankle throbbed fiercely, feeling as though it had been branded with a hot iron. The tightness of the speaker wire binding my wrists and ankles cut off my circulation, adding to the pain. Groggily, I struggled to make sense of my surroundings until my attention was drawn to the television at the foot of the bed. On the screen, Nina appeared, sitting unclothed alongside Ryan. She turned to the camera and greeted me directly, clearly aware I'd regained consciousness. What followed was surreal and horrifying. Nina explained with unsettling confidence that I was about to witness their celebration. Ryan, she said, deserved the first opportunity for his role in exposing my supposed infidelity and orchestrating this moment. Then she summoned Marcus, who entered the scene, grinning as he prepared to join. The two men made it clear they intended to put on a show, one that would be recorded for me to relive as often as I liked. In that moment, Nina's actions didn't concern me. Our marriage was already beyond saving. My main focus was breaking free from the restraints. I could feel my hands and feet growing numb, the circulation slowing dangerously, and I didn't know how long Nina and her friends would take to finish whatever they were doing. Waiting wasn't an option. I started with my left leg, tugging hard against the wire. The pain was sharp, forcing me to stop and rest for about 30 seconds before trying again. After several attempts, I gave one final, forceful pull and the wire snapped. My left ankle was bleeding, but the wounds seemed manageable. Moving on to my right leg proved much harder, especially with my sprained ankle. The process was agonizing, and breaking the wire caused significant tearing of the skin, leading to heavy bleeding. With my legs finally free, I could ease some of the tension in my arms, but the wires around my wrists were tightly knotted. Using only my teeth, I began biting at the wires binding my hands, mimicking the approach I'd used for my ankles. Freeing my right wrist was excruciating. The bleeding was as severe as the injury to my ankle. Once my right arm was free, removing the last restraint on my left wrist became easier. It left minor cuts and a bit of bleeding, but I was finally out. As I examined my injuries, blood continued to flow from the gashes on my wrists and ankles. Searching the room for something to use as bandages turned up nothing, and the bed sheets were already soaked with blood, a quantity that startled me. When I tried to stand, dizziness overwhelmed me, and I collapsed back onto the bed. My head throbbed, my face was tender, and a wave of nausea swept over me. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my stomach, when I heard someone call my name. At first, I thought Nina had entered the room. But when I opened my eyes, I realized her voice was coming from the television. She was speaking directly to me, asking if I was paying attention to what was on the screen. Turning my head, I saw Nina with Ryan, positioned in a provocative, intimate act. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she actually believed I'd enjoy watching her. But I knew that if she could understand the depth of my anger at that moment, it would drive her far away. Pushing myself off the bed, I swung my right arm at the television, splattering blood across the screen. Turning away, I caught my reflection in a mirror. A large bruise stood out on my forehead, marked by 4 small, distinct lumps, knuckle imprints. The full reality of what had happened began to sink in. My wife had orchestrated this entire ordeal, leaving me confused, beaten, and tied to a bed, just so she could be with my former best friend and some stranger. The thought of grabbing a baseball bat crossed my mind, but I hesitated. I was too weak to act on it, and the consequences of escalating things further held me back. Lingering dizziness from the medication and the possibility of Ryan and his friend overpowering me stopped me from acting impulsively. The thought of causing serious harm or even taking a life sobered me enough to think twice. Looking around the disheveled room, an idea began to form. I smeared blood on the bedposts and pillows, then dragged 2 parallel streaks across the carpet from the side of the bed to the door. Crossing the hall to the guest bathroom, I searched under the sink and found gauze and adhesive tape. Before leaving, I took care to clean any blood I'd left in the sink, on the cabinet doors, or on the floor. Fortunately, the master bedroom in our house was on the ground floor, so I didn't have to worry about Nina or her companions overhearing me. Back in the bedroom, I relied on my first aid training to tend to my injuries. I carefully wrapped gauze around both ankles and my left wrist, leaving only the wounds on my right wrist exposed. Grabbing the cordless phone from the nightstand, I deliberately got blood on it before dialing emergency services. When the operator answered, I frantically begged for help, my voice trembling as I told them I feared for my life. Overcome by emotion, I let out a desperate "Oh God," before letting the phone drop to the floor along with the gauze and tape I had been holding. Moving quickly but cautiously, I made my way down the back stairway leading to the garage and exited the house. As I passed the car in the driveway, I smeared blood on the driver's door handle and left a clear, bloody handprint on the trunk lid. Once outside, I crossed the street to an empty lot, found a spot behind some bushes, and hid there to watch what would happen next. While waiting, I wrapped my right wrist with the gauze. It didn't take long. Within 5 minutes, the first police car arrived. 2 officers got out and approached the front door. Moments later, a second car pulled up, and those officers headed around to the back of the house. At the front door, one officer rang the doorbell, waited, then rang it again. When there was still no response after 30 seconds, they knocked loudly. The porch light flicked on, and Nina opened the door. From my hiding spot, it seemed like the sight of the police startled her, though I couldn't make out her expression clearly. The officers informed Nina about the emergency call placed from the address just minutes earlier and asked her what it was about. Nina denied knowing anything about the call, insisting she was alone in the house. The officers weren't buying it and continued questioning her. Nina doubled down, claiming she was home alone because her husband was away at a business show. Her lie unraveled quickly when the officers who had gone around the back returned, with Ryan and Marcus in handcuffs. One of them announced, "Look who we caught sneaking out the back door." Nina seemed to crumble at the sight of them. She slid down against the door frame until she was sitting on the floor, visibly shaken. One of the officers helped her to her feet and escorted her back inside while Ryan and Marcus were also brought into the house. Although I couldn't see what was happening inside, I could imagine the scene unfolding. I pictured the officers opening the guest bedroom door to reveal the bloody mess. Nina's expression turning to shock as she realized I wasn't there. That thought alone brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. Part of me wanted to sneak over to the car and hide in the trunk, but I knew it wasn't worth the risk of being seen. Instead, I stayed put, waiting. About 10 minutes passed in relative quiet before chaos erupted. 2 more police cars arrived with flashing lights and sirens. Ryan and Marcus were soon led out of the house in handcuffs, shouting their innocence, claiming they had done nothing to Nina's husband. The officers ignored their protests as they placed them in separate patrol cars and drove off. Meanwhile, other officers were inspecting the car in the driveway. It didn't take long for them to spot the blood on the driver's door handle and then on the trunk lid. Retrieving the keys from Marcus's car, one of the officers opened the trunk. I wished I could have been hiding inside when they opened it, but it turned out my presence wasn't necessary. As soon as the trunk was opened, officers gathered around, and one of them called out, "We've got weapons and drugs here." They pulled out 3 MAC-10s and what appeared to be a kilo of cocaine. A plainclothes officer arrived, and the situation seemed to escalate as the discovery was documented. Over the next 20 minutes, I watched as the officers photographed the evidence and arranged for the car to be towed away. With Ryan and Marcus already gone, the focus turned back to Nina. She was eventually escorted out of the house in handcuffs, placed into a patrol car, and driven away. The remaining officers secured the house, wrapping the front door in crime scene tape. Realizing it was time for me to go, I slipped through the empty lot and onto the street behind. Sticking to the shadows, I walked the 10 blocks to a shopping center that had a McDonald's. I knew I looked like a wreck, my wrists and ankles wrapped in bloody bandages, and a swollen, black and blue lump on my forehead, but I needed to get off the streets for a while. Rummaging through my pocket, I found just enough change to buy a large coffee. When I stepped into the McDonald's, I braced myself for stares, expecting everyone to notice my disheveled state. But to my surprise, I blended right in with the crowd. At least 15 other street people were scattered around, sipping coffee or eating burgers, paying me no attention. Taking a seat in the corner, I sipped my coffee and reflected on the chaos I had set into motion. A small smile crept across my face as I pictured Nina, Ryan, and Marcus being interrogated by the police. The thought of them struggling to explain my disappearance almost made me laugh out loud. I could imagine the officers pressing them about my whereabouts, their fumbling answers dismissed as lies. But amidst the satisfaction, I realized I had a lingering problem: how to resurface without being accused of intentionally misleading the authorities. By the time I finished my coffee, An idea had started to form. I took my empty cup to the counter, asking for a refill, and the manager approached. He offered to refill my cup on one condition, that I leave immediately afterward. I accepted his deal. With a fresh coffee in hand, I began the slow, painful 20-block journey to a park I knew well. My sprained ankle made walking agonizingly slow, and I kept to the shadows, ducking behind trees and shrubs whenever a car passed. The trek took almost an hour, but eventually, I reached the park. There, I found a secluded picnic table in a dark corner and settled down to wait. Until 3 a.m., I sat quietly, occasionally sipping my coffee. At that hour, I carefully removed the bloodied bandages from my wrists and ankles, tossing them into a nearby trash can. Then, I made my way to the far side of the park and lay down in the grass near a jogging trail. Despite the pain throbbing in my wrists and especially my injured ankle, I managed to drift in and out of sleep until the first light of dawn. I stayed as still as possible, hoping for a few more moments of rest, but I knew what would come next. This park was a morning favorite for joggers and dog walkers. It was only a matter of time before someone found me. I was right. Within half an hour, a passerby discovered me. By then, I was in the back of an ambulance en route to the hospital. Without my wallet, which I had left on the guest room bedside table, I had no identification. At the hospital, I wasn't particularly coherent when doctors and nurses tried to get information out of me. Slipping in and out of awareness, I made sure my act held up long enough to avoid cutting things short. It wasn't until almost noon that the police arrived. I feigned sleep until nearly 1 o'clock, using the time to steel myself for the conversation. I'd rehearsed my story in my head, preparing to stick as close to the truth as I could without revealing too much. When the plainclothes officer, Detective Richards, introduced himself and asked if I was Ethan Price, I confirmed my identity. I agreed to answer his questions but warned him I might not be much help. I explained that I couldn't remember everything clearly. Detective Richards started by recounting how a man walking his dog found me in the park around 6 o'clock that morning. Then, he encouraged me to share anything I could recall. I began my story. I told him I'd returned home the previous night from a trip to San Diego, arriving a day earlier than planned. When I entered the house, I found my wife, Nina, in an intense conversation with my best friend, Ryan Adams. I asked what was going on, but before I could process her response, someone grabbed me from behind, cutting off my air. Nina was shouting at me, but I could barely focus on her words as I struggled to breathe. I admitted that I must have been drugged or otherwise incapacitated because the next thing I remembered was waking up in the guest bedroom, tied to the bed. I described the bleeding from my wrists and ankles and the growing numbness in my hands and feet. I told him how, in my desperate attempts to free myself, I only caused more harm to my already raw and injured limbs. It was during this time that I noticed the television in the master bedroom was on. To my shock, it showed Nina engaged in intimate activities with Ryan and another man, a large, unfamiliar individual. Straining to hear their conversation, I caught fragments that sounded like plans involving me once they were done with Nina. My mind was still clouded, but it seemed like they were contemplating getting rid of me. At first, I thought Nina might have been coerced, that she was a victim of whatever these men were planning. But as I listened, it became painfully clear she was a willing participant. I thought I heard her say something like, "Go take care of that idiot." The realization hit me like a blow, leaving me both terrified and furious. I focused all my energy on breaking free, and when I finally managed to snap the wires binding me, I called emergency services. Detective Richards later asked why I had dropped the phone during the call. I explained that I let it fall the moment I realized Nina was complicit. Overwhelmed by fear and desperation, I decided to escape the house immediately. Beyond that point, I told him my memory was a blur. I couldn't remember anything until waking up in the park. When he pressed about whether I recalled being struck, I admitted I didn't think anyone had hit me, but much of what happened remained hazy. I shifted the conversation, curious about what Nina had said about the incident. Richards revealed that Nina claimed to have discovered my supposed infidelity during my business trips and wanted to teach me a lesson. According to her, it was never her intention to hurt me, and she had planned to release me after getting her revenge. I asked where Nina had gotten the idea that I cheated. Richards explained that Ryan had been the source, feeding her the narrative and even referring to me as a stupid pig. Frustrated, I expressed disbelief that Nina had taken Ryan's word at face value without questioning it or coming to me directly. I couldn't fathom how she had let someone manipulate her so completely. I assured Richards that I had never been unfaithful and stated that Nina could have easily confronted me. I could have proven my innocence. Richards wrapped up his questioning with a few clarifications but didn't push back on anything I had said. The following day, I was discharged from the hospital and returned home. When I arrived, there was a message waiting on the answering machine. It was from Nina, pleading for me to come to the police station. She claimed everything had been a misunderstanding and begged me to post her bail. Without hesitation, I deleted the message and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Not long after, the phone rang again. This time, it was Rachel Bennett, Nina's best friend. Rachel, a known troublemaker in my eyes, had been thrown out by her husband after he caught her cheating. I had always disliked Rachel, partly because I suspected she influenced Nina's worst decisions. Something told me she had a hand in this mess too. Curious about what she had to say, I agreed to let her come over. An hour later, Rachel showed up at my door. She informed me she'd spoken with Nina, who was staying at her parents' house. According to Rachel, Nina accused me of cheating during my business trips. I firmly denied the claim, reiterating that I had never been unfaithful. Rachel said Nina didn't give her many details, only mentioning a misunderstanding and how my call to the police had led to her arrest. In response, I recounted the same story I'd told Detective Richards, sticking closely to the truth. Rachel feigned shock but didn't seem ready to turn against Nina. She suggested that Nina's actions were out of character, speculating that she might be experiencing some kind of mental breakdown. When Rachel asked if I planned to speak with Nina to hear her side, I hesitated. I told her I might consider it but questioned why Nina hadn't given me the same courtesy before taking such extreme measures. If she thought I was guilty of something, why hadn't she talked to me? I asked if Nina had confided in Rachel beforehand. Rachel denied it, claiming that if Nina had, she would have advised her to confront me directly instead of going through with her revenge plan. I didn't buy it. I doubted Rachel had ever been a fan of mine, so I found it hard to believe she would have tried to stop Nina. Rachel tried to appear sympathetic, suggesting I take my time and avoid any rash decisions. I assured her I wasn't planning anything drastic. Before leaving, Rachel leaned in and kissed me on the mouth, asking if there was anything she could do to help. Her intentions were clear, but I pretended not to notice. "You've already been a big help," I said with a polite smile. "I just need some time alone to figure things out." With that, Rachel left and I was finally alone with my thoughts. After Rachel left, I wasted no time. I contacted a lawyer, Jacob Mitchell, and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon at 2 o'clock. Once in his office, I laid out the situation succinctly. Nina's actions had made our marriage irreparable, and I wanted divorce proceedings initiated immediately. I expressed my preference to have her served with the papers the very next day. Mr. Townsend leaned back in his chair, his expression one of mild concern. "Are you sure you want to move this quickly?" he asked. In my experience, taking a little more time to reflect often prevents hasty decisions. Some marriages can be salvaged if both parties are given a chance to cool off. I acknowledged his advice, even pretending to consider it for a moment. "You may have a point," I said, nodding. This seemed to satisfy him. "But," I continued, "I think serving the papers the day after tomorrow is reasonable. That gives me time to think, and her time to prepare." The lawyer frowned slightly, perhaps wondering if my sudden flexibility was genuine. "I still think it might be too soon," he began. "If you can't act promptly on my behalf, Mr. Townsend," I interrupted, "I'll find someone who will." That shut the conversation down. With a slight shrug, he agreed to my timeline. I provided Nina's location at her parents' house and her work address, ensuring the necessary information was in his hands. When I left his office, I felt emotionally numb. My ankle, however, still throbbed like hell, a sharp reminder of everything I'd endured. I pushed through the pain and headed to the bank. At the bank, I closed all our joint accounts and canceled the credit cards we shared. I then opened new accounts in my name alone. I knew that, eventually, Nina would probably be entitled to half of our assets, but I was determined to make her work for every penny. Over the following weeks, Nina tried to contact me repeatedly, calling both my home and my office, but I ignored every attempt. My lawyer informed me that she intended to contest the divorce unless I agreed to meet her and hear her side of the story. I told him I needed time to consider her demand. After more than a month, I revisited the issue with Mr. Townsend. I asked if Nina was still insisting on a meeting. Surprised by the delay, he promised to confirm with her attorney. Later that day, he called back with her answer. Yes, she still wanted a meeting. I provided clear instructions for my response. Let her know that if she contests the divorce, I won't agree to meet face-to-face. I told him. That's fine, but she needs to understand that the proceedings will stay on hold until she's ready to cooperate. In the meantime, we'll remain legally married, but I will not see or speak to her. Townsend agreed to relay the message, assuring me he would make my stance crystal clear. The next day, I decided to visit Clara, Ryan's wife. She greeted me warmly, inviting me inside and offering me a drink. As we sat on her sofa, she began apologizing for Ryan's actions. I held up a hand to stop her. You're not responsible for what Ryan did, I said firmly. Just like I'm not responsible for what Nina did. They made their choices. Clara nodded, acknowledging my point, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. Still, she said, I feel terrible about what happened to you. There was a pause before she continued, her voice softer. Maybe we could find some comfort in each other? I blinked at her directness, caught off guard but not entirely surprised. Playfully, I said, well, I've always thought you were attractive. If I'd met you when I was single, I might have asked you out. Before I could say more, Clara leaned in and kissed me. Her intentions were clear, and I didn't resist. She led me to the bedroom where we made slow, deliberate love, an escape for both of us. Afterward, she whispered in my ear, admitting how much she enjoyed being with me. I'd like us to do this again, she said, her breath warm against my skin. I love how this feels. The next week, I received a call from the district attorney's office. Oliver Quinn, the assistant DA handling the cases against Nina, Ryan, and Marcus, wanted clarification. He mentioned that Nina's lawyer had claimed I might not press charges. That's not accurate, I said firmly. I haven't discussed the matter with anyone. Quinn thanked me, promising to keep me updated on the proceedings. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel that the worst was far from over. I really don't know what to do, I confessed to the assistant district attorney. I know my wife was involved in what happened to me, but I can't say for sure if she planned for me to be drugged, tied up, or worse. I think she did, but there's no hard proof. I don't even know who tied me to that bed so tightly that I was losing circulation to my hands and feet. But I'm not here to ask for leniency. I'll leave it up to the justice system to decide their fates. In the end, justice, or something close to it, was served. Marcus was convicted on multiple charges: assault, kidnapping, possession of illegal substances, and a felony for the weapons found in his car's trunk. He got hard time in a maximum security prison. Ryan pleaded guilty to assault and was sentenced to a year in minimum security. Nina, meanwhile, got the lightest sentence: probation. Still, it was a felony conviction, which meant she no longer had any say in our divorce. That chapter of my life was officially closed, leaving me with the house and our savings. About a month after the divorce, Rachel showed up again. She suggested I meet Nina, who apparently wanted to apologize and explain her actions. I pretended to be reluctant, though curiosity burned within me. Eventually, Rachel convinced me, and we arranged to meet at a cocktail lounge near my house. When Nina arrived, she slid into the booth across from me, her expression a mixture of nervousness and regret. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said softly. Her voice trembled as she began her apology. Nina explained that she had recently learned of my supposed infidelity during my business trips. "I believed Ryan when he told me you were cheating," she said. I cut her off sharply. That's because you wanted to believe it. I've never cheated on you, Nina. She blinked in surprise, as if the idea had never crossed her mind. At the time, she insisted. It felt so real. Ryan seemed so sure, and I was hurt and angry. I lost perspective. I stared at her, incredulous. You lost perspective? When I asked you what was wrong before my last trip, you brushed me off. You didn't share your suspicions or ask for the truth. Instead, you plotted this. Nina's cheeks flushed as she looked away. I needed time to process, she murmured. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Process? You trusted Ryan, of all people, and his word alone? You didn't even bother to ask me. You had Marcus, a known drug dealer, involved. How did you think any of this would end well? Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. Did you really believe I'd forgive you? That this was how we'd move forward? Nina turned her head, avoiding my gaze. I was angry, and I thought this would even the score. I leaned back, shaking my head. Even the score? You didn't catch me with another woman. You didn't even have proof, just Ryan's lies. And for that, you planned to humiliate me. Drug me, tie me to a bed, and make me watch you with 2 men, including someone I used to consider my best friend. This wasn't just revenge, Nina. It was sadistic. Nina's composure crumbled. Her shoulders shook as sobs racked her body. Please, she cried. Give me another chance. I love you. I've always loved you. What happened with Ryan and Marcus meant nothing. It wasn't about love, it was just stupid mistakes. I'll do anything to make it right. Anything to make you love me again. Please. Her tear-streaked face, wide eyes pleading for forgiveness, might have moved me once. Not now. Anything? I asked, my voice steady. Nina sniffled, wiping at her tears with trembling hands. Yes, anything. I slid out of the booth, stood, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Leaning close to her ear, I whispered, drop dead. Her head sank onto the table, her sobs growing louder as I walked out of the lounge. The sound of her crying followed me to the door. 7 months later, I married Clara.